this video, I want to continue the conversation that we've been having about Black Marxism on the water resolution. I think that just understanding the role that Black Marxism plays in the water resolution is really important because I think that a lot of the stuff that people will be talking about in terms of water as a resource and the way that it relates to various things that we'll kind of like talk about as the year unfolds will definitely be surrounding questions of like privatization, capitalism, all of which I think mean that there are kind of like key questions that are placed or different interpretations of Marxism that I think are really important for you to just have like a heavy-handed or a heavy hold on the resolution as a whole. And so I think being able to really understand how to execute Black Marxism on the app could be a really, really good strategy. And I also think that being able to understand the mindset that a team that's trying to make this argument is in when you're trying to answer it is also a very helpful place to kind of come from understanding. So if you haven't, you should definitely tune into the intro to Black Marxism and Water that I did. That kind of starts off setting what I think are kind of like the priorities or the ways that I think this is specifically important on the affirmative and specifically important on the water resolution. And then the last video that I did, kind of starting off the Black Marxism on water on the app for the water resolution, where I talked a little bit about what I think like the best kind of form of this argument looks like and what I think the major strengths and weaknesses are in order for you to start figuring out what are the ways that you kind of want to execute it on your own and what kind of like model you can use to kind of like figure out the type of arguments that you want. I think that things in this video will most likely include talking about the way in which Black Marxism seeks to be able to answer criticisms, counterplans, and disads in the way I think it approaches various arguments and the types of things I think you'll see most often that you should prepare for. I think that when you're just generally talking about the types of criticisms that Black Marxism will have to be able to answer or that Black Marxism needs to be prepared for, I think a lot of them definitely will take on just the central question of how do you think about like Marxist theory as a whole. But I definitely think a lot of the secondary question will definitely be based in trying to win the type of organizational structure that the affirmative is attempting to spot or make sense of is one that actually doesn't allow for the kind of like creation or the usage or of the types of like necessary creative and generative strategies that kind of like work to basically create a net better way of thinking about how we're able to kind of work within the limitations of institutionality. I think that when I think about like something that's a possible weakness of a lot of the Black Marxism affirmatives, especially ones that I think teams are most likely to run to, I think they still kind of like form and assign a value to like that kind of like normative party politics that can definitely make it a lot harder for you to be able to it can definitely make it a lot harder for you to be able to figure out what types of strategies you can pivot into it in order to kind of win a delinkage from that kind of like basically necessity or the use of institutional structures. But I think that a better way for you to kind of think about this is to kind of use the kind of framing that I was talking about when we were talking about the last video, where I started talking about the particular usage of tactics instead of spotting movements in order to kind of change and orient how the link debate goes here. I think that for a lot of teams, like really setting yourself in materially gives the judge a clear picture of what you're doing, and perceptually I think is a negative, like a lot of different links and places they can kind of like work off of as like a base level. But I think that as you kind of like further develop this into thinking about the ways in which you could kind of use tactics specifically and thinking about particular actions that are taken by various types of resistance groups and like forms of resistance from various types of organizations can be used, I think, as like very good ways in order to respond to the types of ways in which teams kind of like want to force you into like this institutional relationship to how you respond to things like capitalism, etc. I think that when you are able to kind of like break down the way in which like Black Marxism is able to consider the possible limitations of institutionality, you have a really good way of being able to figure out how the criticism kind of like is attempting to kind of split differences between the affirmative and the alternative. And I think that being able to de-link yourself from those criticisms makes it a lot easier for you to pivot into the permutation, which I think that Black Marxism definitely wants to do in a world where it's trying to center the debate on like the material implications of various strategies and why the focus of those kind of material implications create a way for us to think about the relevancy of impacts that really puts the type of stuff that I think the Black Marxism and Water app would really focus on at the center of what the judge's ballot is. And I think that there are so many good arguments about like why debate can kind of be used as a radical planning space in order to make that possible, that I think there are a lot of really interesting net benefits to the way in which the permutation not only changes the various ways in which the methodology is kind of like organized and articulated, but it's also to basically able to set up various ways for you to articulate the benefits to the way in which we debate debate at like an institutional level, and the way that that changes the types of like methodologies and subjects we could become as we move outside of debate, which I think ultimately allows you to like really bring in a lot of different benefits that the negative team has a hard time, I think, really having unique offense against, especially if they aren't putting a lot of time into like the framing portions of the debate or really framing what the value of debate should be, which is a place where I think Black Marxism has a really set goal on, just because of all the arguments that can be made about like the various types of like natures of organizing spaces and the way in which like Black Marxism responds to debate as kind of like one of the spaces. I then think when you're transitioning this into how you're thinking about counterplanted dissent debates as a whole, it's really important to think about how most of these debates I think will end up pivoting into just straight up impact turn debates. I think a lot of times when you see arguments like this, teams that are most comfortable attempting to make arguments for the counterplanted dissent, they're about proving the utility of particular institutional values and the particular usage of both private and kind of like federal institutions that are kind of meant to manage water resources at various levels, and the kind of particular choice that those agencies and the power that those agencies have, and the ability for us to think about how we navigate water rights as like an idea. And I think that when you're able to kind of center that and think about that as kind of like the central goal for what the counterplan and the dissents are able to accomplish, it allows you to build a really thorough impact turn debate that isn't just focused on the question of cap good or bad, but is focused on being able to win that the inevitable limitations of such institutions are exactly what make them kind of like both impossible to be reformed, but also would make like the counterplan and the dissad basically attempts to kind of de-radicalize the affirmatives relationship to both the resolution and governmentality. And I think that being able to kind of put that pressure and flip how that kind of only solidifies our current relationship to the environment because of the way it limits us to a particular relationship to institutionality can definitely be a lot of ways that you're able to push against and really use a lot of these arguments about push against a lot of the arguments that are being made in order to kind of justify the counterplan and the dissent at both the level of how they're affecting like the climate, but also how they're kind of like functionally stopping the kind of ability of the affirmative kind of like radical strategy. And I think that there are a lot of arguments then that just need to be made in terms of how is debate responsible, or in what way can debate be responsive to these various crises, in order for the judge to really figure out what role their ballot plays and what roles the particular space plays and what types of impacts they should be evaluating and how they should be thinking about the efficacy of methods like in the face of that and in response to that. And I think being able to really kind of like think in tandem that way and being able to push that question of the impact turn debate can definitely be a way for you to build a lot of diverse kind of responses that go beyond what I think a lot of the baseline level responses team come into when they're ready for a cap good bad debate. Hopefully this video was helpful for you, and hopefully you'll keep tuning into more videos I'll be doing talking about Black Marxism, just as a strategy, how I think teams can be executing and answering it. And hopefully you'll always tune into more videos. Thanks.